Have you been diagnosed with depression and struggle with sadness?
Maybe you're scared of being criticized.
Loss of interest, aches and pain.
Always thinking something terrible.
Ask your doctor about Effects or Exile.
Ask your doctor about Cymbalta.
Talk to your doctor about Zoloft.
So talk to your healthcare professional.
Get with your doctor today.
Your doctor.
Tell your doctor.
Contact your doctor immediately.
Talk with your doctor.
Более 40 лет назад на встрече в Пуэрто-Рико светила психиатрии разработали свою версию будущего для общества.
We see a developing potential for nearly a total control of human emotional status, mental functioning, and will to act.
Их план к 2000 году создать ассортимент психиатрических препаратов, регулирующих каждый аспект поведения человека.
I was diagnosed with depression and put on Paxil.
ADD, and I was prescribed Ritalin.
General anxiety disorder, prescribed Zoloft.
Bipolar disorder, and I take lithium.
PTSD, Zoloft.
I was on Paxil.
When they placed me on Zoloft.
They gave me Adderall.
I was prescribed Siptamil,
Tegretol,
Lexapro, Depakote,
Stelazine,
Adderall,
Concerta, Orazine,
Prozac,
Lorazepam,
Effexor,
Clonazepam, Ritalin,
dexamphetamine,
Paxil,
Cylert,
Prozac,
Adderall,
Elavil,
Depakote, Wellbutrin, Seroquel, etc., etc.
100 миллионов человек в мире принимают эти препараты. Как это произошло? Психиатры убедили их в том, что они больны.
They want you to think you're diseased from birth, and that all those experiences of life, childhood and adolescence and teenage years and adulthood and being a senior citizen, that these are all various stages of disease.
Because let's face it, we've all been depressed at one time. We've all been anxious at one time. These are normal emotions that we feel.
Every emotional and spiritual problem is reduced to a label.
And of course, all of those diseases require pharmaceutical treatments. This is big, big business.
Укрывшись за вывеской профессиональной медицины, психиатры получают огромный доход, в то же время признавая, что их профессия лишена научной основы.
You don't really have any specific blood tests or other tests that are definitive for any mental illness whatsoever.
It would be neat if it would become much more scientific.
Well, if you go to my office and you tell me that you're depressed, there's nothing, and no blood sample or whatever, no tests.
There are not current available tests to verify your diagnosis.
I don't use any tests.
You do not have a test to say, well, this is this disorder and this is the best medication for this disorder.
For many years we thought we had the tests nailed down, but it turned out that they weren't of any value.
If you don't know what's causing the symptoms, then to give somebody something to alleviate the symptoms is close to impossible.
By the time a drug's approved and it hits the general population, we don't know even 50% of the side effects that are involved with that drug.
And these pills cause heart attacks and liver problems and immune system problems and lots of other medical problems. So you're playing with fire.
Каждый день психотропные препараты вызывают серьезные побочные эффекты. И хотя психиатры и фармацевтические компании хорошо осознают опасность своих препаратов, от последствий приходится страдать ничего не подозревающим потребителям.
Everything became worse. Each mood swing was worse.
He would have chronic headaches, chronic, nausea, not feeling good.
She was very agitated, very, very jumpy.
She was having horrible hallucinations.
Her personality was disintegrating.
Once he started on that drug, the cloud just stayed over him and stayed over him and stayed over him. It got darker and darker.
He thought there wasn't anything worth living to kill himself. That was not Matthew. That was the drugs.
At least I would like to have said, I love you. I didn't get a chance to do that.
Ежедневно психиатрические препараты калечат множество людей и убивают около 3000 человек в месяц. Но количество смертей не было бы таким огромным, если бы психиатры в тесной связи с производителями препаратов не рекламировали их использование другим врачам по всему миру. Сегодня 70% всех психотропных препаратов прописывается врачами-терапевтами. Как это случилось? Маркетинг.
It's about creating a good story that uses science, that convinces a physician
to think about writing a prescription.
This is not science. This is incredibly effective marketing. It has nothing to do with science.
They use what I call statistical contortionism. Basically just skew the numbers, make everything look fantastic, you hide the bad numbers.
They're learning every trick in the book. They're evolving into efficient marketing machines, and it's working.
There's definitely an unholy alliance between psychiatry and pharmaceutical sales. That's a marriage made in heaven.
They're like conjoined twins. They're joined at the wallet.
И учитывая, что в диагностическом руководстве психиатров уже 374 психических расстройства, их бизнес процветает. Фармацевтические компании расширили ассортимент психотропных препаратов с 44 в 1966 году до 174 сегодня. 5 самых популярных психотропных препаратов в сумме приносят больше дохода, чем валовой национальный продукт большинства стран на Земле. В целом, психиатры загребают более $3 триллиона в год. Как такое возможно? Это история обмана. Поверить в нее трудно, но игнорировать ее губительно.
We took him to a psychiatrist, and within a matter of minutes, yeah, she's ADHD, and here's your drug.
Went on the Medicaid, and 5 minutes later, he was on Zyprexa.
He saw the psychiatrist and prescribed the medicine for 20 minutes.
The guy didn't even look at her. He talked to her a little bit. Now, how can you tell if somebody's ADHD or not ADHD from just a few minutes talking to her?
Next thing I know, I'm getting handed a handful of Xanax. That's how easy it is to get these drugs. Just so easy. It's just passed to me like candy. That's simple.
If a person were to walk in off the street, sit down with a psychiatrist, the chances of him being prescribed a drug before he were to leave the office, I would have to put it at 100%.
Psychiatrists prescribe drugs. They might have different ways of diagnosing, they might have different ways of interacting with a patient, but it's rare to find a psychiatrist that uses no drugs.
The psychiatrists today are, in quotes, admitting they can't cure these mental illnesses, and they're therefore going to manage your illness by using a drug.
50 years ago, a person who was going through a divorce would have relied on family, friends, clergy, and even the family doctor to a certain extent for conversation to work through the issue. They certainly wouldn't have been medicated.
Это было до начала эры психотропных препаратов. Психиатры, занимавшие низшую ступень в медицине, работали почти исключительно в психиатрических лечебницах. При отсутствии исцеленных у них практически не было шанса снискать у пациентов и коллег право называться врачами.
Psychiatrists had for years been on the fringe of medicine. Typically, the standard doctor internist would have very low regard for psychiatrists because it was understood not to be a very clear science or art.
Psychiatrists wanted to be viewed as physicians, as doctors. And in order to be viewed as physicians and doctors, the people they dealt with had to be viewed as patients. And if doctors dealt with diseases, then their patients had to be diseased.
Psychiatrists had a wonderful opportunity, they felt, to become respected in the eyes of their peers. They raced to create a whole diagnostic book called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which was created by consensus.
A group of psychologists and psychiatrists get together, and if they have made common observations, they have a vote and they now classify a new disease. And they give it a number and it graduates into the DSM classification.
And it's a dangerous book. It's a book that has many disorders that could apply to any one of us because the disorders are not real medical diseases. And it's things that apply to nearly all of us at times. Are you afraid of meeting new people? Are you afraid to speak in front of a large crowd of people? Does it make you nervous to go and to talk to your boss about a complaint?
You can invent a mental disorder based on a checklist of symptoms, and that is exactly how the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the billing Bible for psychiatry, works.
С момента выхода первого издания DSM в 1952 году количество диагнозов постоянно росло. Из брошюры в 130 страниц со 106 так называемыми психическими расстройствами ДСМ превратилась в толстую книгу в 886 страниц. Только используя эту книгу, психиатры могут ставить диагнозы, прописывать лекарства и выставлять счета за услуги. В настоящее время с помощью ДСМ психиатры получают более 72 миллиардов долларов из частных и государственных страховых фондов.
The DSM is used to diagnose and then give a label, and the label is used for billing purposes. That's how they get paid.
You have to have a term in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual in order to then call it a disease and treat it as a disease and write a prescription for it.
And so because they can vote it in, they can create, and then the drug industry can just take over and market their drugs for those new disorders.
And those drugs were welcomed by psychiatry leaders because it made us real doctors.
Of course, first the public had to believe that there was something wrong with them, and that thing wrong was biochemical, and that could then be treated by a drug which was supposed to cure all.
And so it was relatively easy, I think, to say, well, look, let's start looking at mental illness as fundamentally a matter of chemical imbalance in the brain.
Chemical imbalance is a term that's used as a marketing ploy, as opposed to anything that there's scientific evidence to support.
Nobody has yet measured, demonstrated, or created a test to show that somebody has a chemical imbalance in their brain. Period.
How do you market a drug that restores the chemical balance or corrects a chemical imbalance? How can you do that in good conscience if you don't even know what one is?
The whole myth of the chemical imbalance was created to sell drugs.
И хотя психиатры и фармкомпании использовали этот миф, чтобы зарабатывать миллиарды, пичкая ничего не подозревающих пациентов тоннами психотропных препаратов, именно общество в итоге платит настоящую цену. По некоторым оценкам, половина всех американцев, совершивших самоубийство, употребляли психотропные препараты. И опять же, по некоторым оценкам, за год в 2,5 раза больше людей умирают от психотропных препаратов, чем от рук убийц. А кому же доверено защищать публику от этих опасных препаратов? В США это администрация по продуктам питания и лекарствам, АППЛ, в экспертных советах которой состоят большей частью психиатры, курсирующие между фармкомпаниями, научным миром, частными практиками и правительством. Так называемая вращающаяся дверь.
The revolving door at FDA is one of the primary reasons why the system that we have works so poorly. That revolving door is a direct result of the fact that a group of people with the same mindset are put into positions of being regulators and in the position of being formulators and sellers and marketers.
The panels that are formed by the FDA to evaluate these drugs, the psychiatrists who are on those panels, almost all of them have conflicts of interest where they have directly or indirectly received funding from the very industry and the very parties within the industry whose drugs they are evaluating.
So there's this tight little relationship between psychiatry, pharmaceutical industry, and FDA where they each mutually support each other, and yet the mental health of the population does not improve.
Возьмите комиссию АППЛ по оценке лекарственных препаратов, одобрившую антидепрессант Паксил. У каждого психиатра в комиссии финансовые связи с фармацевтической индустрией. И конфликты интересов были настолько вопиющими, что Конгресс США начал расследование.
When I check these advisory committees who make recommendations to the FDA, and they're always approved after the advisory committee, I found that there were conflicts of interest. I found that many of the people on the advisory committees had never filed a proper report on stocks and bonds that they owned that might be viewed as a conflict of interest, and they're by law supposed to do that.
Паутина корыстных интересов, оплетающая психиатрию, фарминдустрию и АППЛ, стала еще более крепкой в 1992 году, после принятия закона о взносе, взимаемом с лекарств, отпускаемых по рецепту, известного как ПИДЮФа. Согласно ему, а ППЛ будет получать $100 тысяч за каждый препарат, чтобы он как можно быстрее проходил процедуру одобрения и как можно быстрее попадал в руки потребителя.
Congress told the FDA, your job is no longer to make sure drugs are squeaky clean safe before they get out on the market. Your job now is to hurry up and get new drugs on the market faster.
It acted to set the priorities of the FDA so that if there was a fee paid for a particular drug approval, it could be put on the fast track and rushed to market with less than the usual scrutiny that the FDA would give it.
Итак, безопасностью пожертвовали в угоду прибыли. После принятия ПИДЮФа время испытания препарата сократилось почти с 2 лет, как в 1992 году, всего до 6 месяцев, 4 года спустя. А количество новых препаратов, выпускаемых на рынок, удвоилось. Хотя быстрое одобрение наносит огромный ущерб людям, оно приносит огромные прибыли психиатрии и фармкомпаниям, ведь чем быстрее одобряется препарат, тем быстрее можно на нем заработать. А деньги огромные. Ежедневный оборот одного препарата в среднем превышает $7,7 миллиона. Один препарат Зипрекса приносит почти $12 миллионов в день. И хотя АППЛ взимает сейчас более $1 миллиона за каждую заявку, на линии одобрения препаратов не наблюдается замедлений.
If you look at the relationship between the FDA, the pharmaceutical industry, and the psychiatrists, there's some kind of game that they're playing there. And what is the game? Well, you could say it's money, definitely money.
And when you follow the money, you realize that there is no money in health. There's big money in disease.
That's why all you hear about is managing disease or treating disease. You don't really talk about curing disease.
And so psychiatrists have become mainstream doctors in America. And that is because of the pharmaceutical industry. They can thank the pharmaceutical industry because they become mainstream and because they have a lot more money than they used to. And the drug industry can thank them because now they have thousands of soldiers in their army distributing these drugs to everybody.
Ни младенец, ни старик не защищены от того, что ему припишут какое-либо из сотен фиктивных расстройств, придуманных психиатрами, чтобы приводить в движение многомиллиардную индустрию психотропных препаратов. И с каждым днем область влияния психиатров все шире и шире. Что для этого нужно? Еще один психиатрический ярлык.
How many people do you know who have been diagnosed with a mental disorder?
One. With a mental disorder? 2.
I'm sure a couple.
I know a few.
About 3 or 4 personally.
Probably 4.
Half a dozen?
I'll say about 9.
At least a dozen.
I'll bet I could count 15.
20 that I personally know.
My oldest son is diagnosed.
My mother was diagnosed.
Kid from my childhood.
My friend and ex-boyfriend.
Just my grandfather and cousins.
A friend of mine, friends.
My sister, my neighbors.
2 friends. A girlfriend. A niece. 1 friend.
My mother.
All my friends, everybody I know.
Нас захлестывает поток душевных болезней. Откуда он берется? От психиатров, которые с помощью диагностического и статистического руководства могут навесить ярлык душевнобольного на кого угодно.
Psychiatrists, I believe, they look at every human being and they divide humans into 2 classes: clients and potential clients.
We see this no more prevalent in any field than in the field of the mental disorders, where one disease after another is invented and then popularized and the public is made to worry about it.
It's in disease mongering. It's the selling of sickness. You know, sometimes it's a drug in search of a market, and it's giving public awareness to minor conditions with the ultimate goal is to sell more medications. It's not caring for people.
When you run out of symptoms, you don't have any more clientele to market to. So you have to invent disease. And with psychiatric medications, you can invent diseases all day long. Look at human variation.
Everyday things like shyness, sadness, or even situational depressions like grieving, postpartum depression, they all become studied, and prescriptions start to get written for these drugs.
Before these drugs were introduced in the market, people who had these conditions would not have been given any drug at all. And so it is the branding of a disease, and it is the branding of a drug for the treatment of a disease that did not exist before the industry made the disease.
Пример. Застенчивость. Обычное явление в жизни. Путем голосования была занесена в диагностическое руководство под названием «Социальное тревожное расстройство».
You know, people are nervous. Well, they come up with, say, social anxiety disorder. SAD, they'll call it SAD.
And the connotation is that everybody ought to be happy, and that here's a drug that can make you happy. So that a common occurrence, which is every now and again everybody's sad, we ought to be treating with a drug.
Well, then they'll get this PR firm to drum up business for this. They'll put out all these studies that find, you know, there's so many people afflicted with this SAD, you know, and they'll start putting it in magazines, they'll start putting it on TV, they'll start a patient advocacy group that say, you know, that we're all affected by this, and then they'll come out with Paxil works for this. So they go to the FDA and they said, well, we ran this study and this works for this new invented disorder. And that is SAD, social anxiety disorder. And millions of people suffer from it. And it's purely fictional. It's a normal human emotion that everybody experiences at certain times or another, but they make it into a disease.
Paxil, once it got approved by the FDA as the first antidepressant to be used for social anxiety, it took off huge. And it just moved from number 3 in the market amongst its peer drugs to number 1 in the market.
Социальное тревожное расстройство – это просто еще один придуманный диагноз, позволяющий выписывать все больше и больше лекарств.
Psychiatrists work to promote what the latest disease is going to be. These days, bipolar is getting that same type of promotion.
Everybody's being educated about their bipolar illness, when in fact, we know having emotional ups and downs is distinctly human.
Now bipolar is thrown around like water. You've got bipolar, I have bipolar. If I'm up today, I'm manic. If I go home tonight and I'm depressed because I'm tired, that shows I have bipolar disease. It's a lot of hokum.
Have you ever worried with seeing all the increased media on it that you might have a mental disorder?
Yes.
And which one is that?
I would say bipolar. You know, they talk about bipolar a lot.
Bipolar, I've known a lot of bipolar.
Two friends from both of them were like diagnosed with bipolar.
My neighbor, she was bipolar. I was diagnosed with bipolar.
My mother had bipolar.
He was actually bipolar. Schizophrenic bipolar. Bipolar and obsessive compulsive.
Bipolar and ADHD.
Bipolar disorder. Bipolar, yeah.
Bipolar situation. Bipolar.
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 There are 3 personality disorders, and then the most recent is bipolar. And that's just been in the past year.
Главным проповедником биполярного расстройства, особенно у детей, является психиатр Джозеф Бидерман, которому за его выступления, советы и исследования платят 25 различных фармацевтических компаний.
In 1996, the drug companies funneled all this money to this Dr. Biederman. He's well known. He's the one that came up and said that there's bipolar disorder in little kids. This was unheard of. There was no bipolar disorder in any kids. He came up with the study and published the articles out all over the world, and other doctors followed his lead, that bipolar is in little kids.
Из-за постоянной пропаганды доктором Бидерманом и его коллегами количество диагнозов биполярного расстройства у детей с 1994 года выросло на 4000%, а число прописанных антипсихотиков увеличилось в 5 раз и достигло 2,5 миллионов. В 2008 году сенатское расследование в США установило, что Бидерман скрыл от налогообложения $1 600 000 личного дохода, полученного от фармкомпаний. Но ущерб уже был нанесен. Из-за биполярного мифа, созданного Бидерманом, антипсихотики, одни из сильнейших прописываемых психотропных препаратов, стали самыми популярными препаратами в психиатрии. 3 самых продаваемых антипсихотика вместе приносят $25 тысяч каждую минуту. Какой бы большой ни была психотропная индустрия, психиатры неустанно создают новые диагнозы, чтобы сделать ее еще больше.
Let's say this is the pie right here of a certain class of medications, and this is a pretty profitable pie, and everybody wants a piece of that pie. But what would happen if we made that pie even bigger? And how you make the pie even bigger is by expanding the uses for those drugs.
They've already got a drug that's approved on the shelf. They can just pull it off the shelf, rename it, repackage it, and say, look, we've got a new drug for a new illness.
When Prozac's patent ran out, that Eli Lilly had to look for a new source of profits. So all they did was change the name of the drug from Prozac to Serafem, change the color of the pill from green to pink, and marketed it for PMDD, which is newly introduced into this book.
What it tells us is that if you can come up with a label, a diagnostic label for a drug, then you can sell it like hotcakes.
It's a business model, and it's $1 billion business model, and it works, and it's going to keep continuing.
Сейчас кто угодно может по незнанию начать принимать психотропный препарат, который был иначе назван, иначе упакован и прописан как непсихиатрическое лекарство. Зибан – лекарство от курения. Это на самом деле антидепрессант вилбутрин. Симбалта – препарат от депрессии и беспокойства. Теперь рекламируется как интриф – средство от недержания мочи. Психиатрические исследователи опробуют психотропные препараты для всевозможных состояний, таких как тучность, алкоголизм, азартность, климактерические приливы, герпес, тошнота, зуд, дрожь и выпадение волос. Для каждой болезни есть таблетка. И практически никому не говорят о том, как опасны психиатрические препараты.
As a chemist, I'm making these drugs. They're proving deadly in our labs, and they're proving deadly in other labs. Dangerous, ineffective, causing the exact same thing they're supposed to treat. How are they selling them?
For anyone who's given a label of a psychotic illness, drugs seem to be the automatic choice of treatment as night follows day.
That's all psychiatry does. It's dominated by psychopharmacologists who do nothing but manage symptoms by dispensing pills. That's it. And they don't work. But the fact that they don't work works to the advantage of the drug companies and the psychiatrists, which means that you're not cured, which means that you're a patient for life, you're a customer, you're a client for life. And the worse your health gets, the more drugs you need. It's a great deal for them.
We should all be up in arms about the way we're being treated by psychiatry today. This is a very dangerous industry that has gone so far overboard in inventing fictitious diseases and drugging our children and our population that I consider it to be engaged in crimes against humanity.
Так как на карту поставлено более $80 миллиардов в год, выручаемых за препараты, массированной торговли психиатрическими болезнями в современном обществе невозможно избежать. Но за всеми этими маркетинговыми приемами кроется секрет, который шокирует клиентов-психиатров. Как тестируются эти препараты и насколько они безопасны.
No one knows precisely how these psychiatric medications act.
We don't know if I give you a medication if it is going to work or not.
There's not a great deal of scientific support for using them.
I try to pick a drug whose side effects might be useful.
You have to choose what is the best option.
We don't have sure methods.
There are no rules. Everything it's an art, really.
Often it's trial and error.
It's a kind of a trial and error.
It's trial and error.
Some degree of trial and error, I guess.
A blind man's bluff or something like that.
You never know if it's the right drug.
It's a much more complex subject.
There's always going to be huge surprises, and that's what makes it so difficult. The best psychiatrists in the world will mess up all the time.
The American public is being treated as a mass medical experiment. We are all being treated like guinea pigs by the pharmaceutical companies, the psychiatric industry, and the FDA.
They are basically
testing drugs on large parts of the population without really knowing what the results are going to be.
It's a very dire situation that we're facing. We're talking about people's health and in many situations people's lives. These are very serious issues.
Так как психотропные препараты содержат опасные вещества, их распространение тщательно регулируется правительствами мира. Чтобы получить разрешение на применение, новые препараты должны пройти тесты, цель которых – защитить людей.
When a pharmaceutical company develops a new drug that they want to send to the market, what they do is they have to run it through clinical trials. They have to be able to provide to the FDA safety data to say this is a safe and effective drug.
In clinical trials, psychiatrists are engaged to do the research. And we could bank on the fact that these psychiatrists are tied to the pharmaceutical companies.
And a psychiatrist puts their name on there, they're seen as an expert. Talking mental drugs, who writes them? It's psychiatrists. So that's how it works. It's a terrible system.
The desperate thing about it is that it's all dressed up in the name of science. It's not science at all, it's pure marketing. But they get away with it because it's called science.
There's really no test, no x-ray, there's no chemistry that shows you have this condition. It's really just the opinion of someone who is probably taking money from pharmaceutical companies to prescribe drugs to people.
Where's the biochemistry? Where's the research? Where's the substantiation? And the answer is it vaporizes like mist in the morning. It's not there.
Но отсутствие научного обоснования не мешает психиатрам проводить клинические испытания опасных препаратов. Клинические испытания состоят из 4 фаз скрупулезного научного тестирования, и результаты первых 3 должны предоставляться правительствам для одобрения распространения этих препаратов. В первой фазе исследуется токсичность препарата. Во второй фазе проводятся тесты, чтобы определить, как препарат ведет себя в теле человека. Если результаты удовлетворительны, переходят к 3-й фазе тестирования. Но в отсутствие лабораторных тестов, доказывающих наличие психических расстройств, и когда на кону большие деньги, исследования психиатрических препаратов крайне субъективны и изобилуют подтасовкой фактов.
There are many places where you can tweak the study just a little bit with the study design or with the way you gather the data or the way the data are reported. And there's so many different ways you could bias a study.
I've seen what they did to the data in these trials. There's no question that they manipulated the data.
For example, let's say they had 100 people to start with. 40% drop out. 30% have a positive response. 30% have no response. They then say that they have a 50% response rate, when in fact, most of us would say it's a 30% response rate because only 30 out of the original 100 really responded. And so you can see that that's a little bit of a manipulation of the research data.
When they design drug studies, they're only looking at the one thing they want to see. And they don't report all the other things that are happening.
Пример. Антидепрессант Симбалта.
Lilly, I believe, in February of 2004, did a clinical trial study. The people in this clinical trial did not have symptoms of depression. And in that clinical trial, there were 11 attempted suicides and 4 suicides completed. One of which was Tracy Johnson, 19-year-old college girl. She did not have any symptoms of depression, and yet this drug pushed her to commit suicide by hanging herself.
That shoots the theory down that they say that, people get suicidal because of the, underlying illness that people kill themselves, that these weren't suicidal people to begin with. These weren't depressed at all. These were healthy people.
Это широко освещалось в средствах массовой информации. Но психиатры в комиссии одобрения ВАППЛ проигнорировали этот летальный случай и одобрили использование Симбалты уже в августе.
One of the reasons why we have underestimated the potential of some psychiatric antidepressant drugs to actually trigger a suicidal kind of behavior in people is because the people who designed the research study didn't include in the research questionnaire this suicidal behavior. And then you can report that we had 0 incidents of this type of behavior among our subjects.
And then the response is trumpeted as if there's something magical about it, when in fact what's happened is a whole statistical tap dance routine that violates good science. However, on the basis of that kind of phony trial, the drug can be marketed.
Keep in mind that when a drug is tested in the clinical trials, it's only a very short period of time. The final phase of testing can be anywhere from 5 to 6 weeks.
The longest of those studies was 8 weeks. The shortest was 4 weeks. So these are not long-term studies. I think most physicians and most people taking the drugs assume they're long-term, 1 year, 2 years, 3 year studies. They're not. They're very, very short studies.
I find it pretty outrageous that we can base a multi-billion-dollar industry on a few 6 or 8 week clinical trials where antidepressant medications beat a sugar pill by a few percentage points.
И на основе таких предвзятых исследований АППЛ регулярно одобряет для неограниченного использования психотропные препараты с потенциально смертельными побочными действиями. Как такое может произойти? Препараты – это большие деньги, а в АППЛ превалируют те, кто получает выгоду от их одобрения.
The FDA panels that evaluate these drugs are largely psychiatrists. All of a sudden you discover there are 20 different pharmaceutical companies paying them, either grants or honorary or some other way. They're getting paid by the pharmaceutical industry.
If you have a psychiatrist who works at the FDA, he could also be being paid by industry. He might sit on industry panels or discussions or get paid to be a speaker. What I found in working with physicians at the FDA was that they could have dual positions. They could sit on an industry board. They could be influenced by industry.
If you've got 10 FDA scientists or 10 committee members, it's just a matter of 6 saying yes, the drug is safe, 4 saying no. And in almost every single case, those 6 saying that the drug is safe and effective always have pharmaceutical ties. They're getting paid, they're getting funded somehow or another.
Have you been diagnosed with depression and struggle with sadness, trouble sleeping, anxiety, or low energy? Ask your doctor about Effexor XR.
После прохождения третьей фазы начинается стремительное наступление на рынок. Но в то время как психиатры уже начинают рекламировать и прописывать эти препараты по всему миру, остается еще одна фаза тестирования – фаза 4.
What phase 4 clinical trials are is when they've actually gotten the drug approved and then they get it into the general population so that we finally find out what it does when it hits ethnic populations, women, children.
Then we see who dies, who has seizures, who has deformed children, who has epilepsy, who has diseases downstream, whose heart stops.
The public is the clinical trial. That's where we find out the problems with these drugs.
This is an experimental stage, and it's so much so that one consumer protection group has advised patients that they refuse a prescription for any drug that hasn't already been on the market for 7 years.
So if you're taking a drug that's only been out for a year or 2 or 3, you are a guinea pig.
И на этом эксперименты не заканчиваются. Дополнительные испытания психиатрических препаратов проводятся на основе придуманных расстройств из их диагностического руководства, чтобы получить еще больше денег, обрушившись на самых беззащитных.
If they test their drugs on children, then they get a 6-month extension on their exclusivity period or patent period.
Психиатрический исследовательский центр в Техасе использует рекламу, чтобы привлечь детей-добровольцев. И когда они попадают внутрь, их продолжают завлекать безыскусными трюками.
They come in here and they help themselves to crackers, cookies, free candy, free crackers.
Но эти подарки лишь наживка для детей, от которых требуется принимать мощные психиатрические препараты, известные тем, что они побуждают их ровесников к суициду и насилию.
These are drugs that would cost maybe several $100s a month in a pharmacy. They actually are getting them free in research.
We love children, and we just love children because they're our future.
By conducting those tests on children, they get a financial incentive that's worth over $1 billion. Those are the facts. You make of them what you will.
Когда речь идет о таких деньгах, эксперименты с психотропными препаратами на детях проводятся вовсю. Было проведено или еще проводятся 323 теста, включая тестирование на детях антидепрессантов для лечения предменструального дисфорического синдрома в 2003 году.
Those drugs which are barely more effective than placebos often have huge side effects which are dangerous and even deadly to people.
Families don't know the risk. If they actually were aware of the risk and believed it, no one would take that risk.
The psychiatrist would never, she didn't say one word to me about what was going to be the effects of the drugs.
No side effects listed, no. Well, let's sit down, we need to talk about this. At that point in time, he said, well, this doesn't have that type of reaction on any children, you know, that it's very safe.
If he had told me then what I know now about it, I never would have taken it.
She said, oh, Beth must have been on Paxil. That's the only way she would kill herself. And I said, well, what is this? How do people know this? I didn't know anybody would know something like that. And we went on the internet, and all of a sudden you find out this it's not uncommon. But it's not uncommon for people to become psychotic on these drugs.
We're entitled to know the truth before we give a mind-altering drug to our children, our wife, our mother, our father, ourselves.
We don't really know what they're doing. That's what scares me. It's all made up theory. There are no facts about what these drugs really do. And if someone said, well, we don't know what this is going to do to you, good or bad, would you take that medication?
Now that is not the practice of medicine. That's the practice of marketing. And this practice of marketing is taking lives. And the poor patient doesn't even know it.
Но в тестировании и маркетинге психотропных препаратов деньги затмевают безопасность. 10 наиболее часто прописываемых препаратов приносят более 26,5 миллиардов долларов в год. Это вдвое больше, чем сумма, каждый год вводимая в оборот монетным двором США. Но чтобы получать такие деньги, психиатры сначала должны убедить тех, кто занимает самые важные позиции на рынке, тех, кто имеет право прописывать лекарства.
Psychiatrists specifically, they're just kind of working as sales agents for the pharmaceutical companies.
There's nothing like another doctor touting the benefits of your drug to drive market share.
They're an extended part of the marketing arm of these companies.
Medications play a primary role.
We give drugs.
Medication is a must.
There's a lot of new medications.
There are medications available for treating GAD.
Medications to use for PTSD.
Antipsychotic medications.
Atypical antipsychotics.
Benzodiazepines.
Stimulants.
Antidepressant medications.
MAOIs. Amphetamines.
Anticonvulsant medications.
Once the medications have been balanced out,
then we move on to a combination of 3 medicines.
There's no absolute limit that is set for the number of medications.
There are so many choices.
Apparently we're willing to try almost anything.
Психиатрические препараты не могут быть проданы без рецепта. Поэтому фармацевтические компании нанимают психиатров, чтобы они рекламировали препараты тем, кто может их прописывать. Денежный след начинается в самых престижных медицинских школах мира, в офисах университетских или академических психиатров, влияние которых огромно. Благодаря их одобрению фармкомпании зарабатывают миллиарды на психиатрических препаратах.
There are a lot of academic psychiatrists especially who have ties to 10 or 15 or 20 different pharmaceutical companies, and so they're making a very large amount of money.
Whether they're professors or whether they work at big, medical institutions, those drug companies will make sure that they've got them on the payroll somehow.
They'll have this person feed this information to their other peers, but it's all being motivated through monies being funded by pharmaceutical companies.
About 40% of the early stage marketing dollars for pharmaceutical companies go straight to these thought leaders, psychiatrists.
Такие финансовые сделки очень прибыльны для так называемых законодателей мнений. Ведущий академический психиатр может получить от фармкомпаний до $500 000 в год.
These people are still considered the stars of their medical centers because they bring in all this great money from the pharmaceutical companies, and that helps keep the coffers of the medical center full.
Universities receive a lot of money from the pharmaceutical industry. Drug companies are building buildings right next to the medical school. They're funding research right and left.
The University of Michigan Depression Center received, I think it was $750,000 from Eli Lilly, and all they do down there is crank out this biological view of psychiatry and mental illness and depression.
Учитывая, что психиатры получают миллионы лекарственных долларов для университетов, неудивительно, что учебный процесс строится вокруг психотропных препаратов.
Training programs in psychiatry, the majority of them now are drugs first. You know, you're really a psychopharmacologist in a way when you come out of a psych residency training program.
Even when I went to medical school, psychiatrists did talk to patients. Now all they do is write a prescription and send them away.
A psychiatrist is trained for one purpose, to administer psychiatric drugs.
Психиатры в университетах не только обучают тех, кто будет их прописывать, но и активно рекламируют препараты своим коллегам. Во-первых, создавая отчеты о клинических, якобы беспристрастных исследованиях, в которых проталкивается как вымышленное расстройство, так и препарат, который его регулирует. Эти отчеты печатаются в профессиональных журналах, чтобы их читали коллеги и цитировали СМИ. Но читатели не знают того, что по оценкам в 50% случаев сами психиатры не принимали участие в исследованиях.
One of the most unethical practices we're aware of is ghostwriting of journal articles, where somebody at the pharmaceutical company will write the paper, and the academic physician will put his name on it and get it published in a major journal when he maybe changed 3 or 4 words in the whole article, and the article was basically written as a marketing tool by the drug company, and yet this academic puts his name on it as if he's the author.
He has had no part in the study, and also he probably hasn't even read the study results, but he is prepared to receive $10,000, $20,000 to put his name at the front of the research, which gives it added authority.
Это псевдоавторство настолько принято, что даже психиатр, руководящий отделением АППЛ, которое проверяет безопасность препаратов, ставит свое имя под чужими статьями.
The average physician picks that up and reads it. He believes it. And it's not a mystery that he would believe it. It seems reasonable that it's in black and white, it's in a good journal, it's in the New England Journal of Medicine, it must be true.
Эти журналы часто рассылаются психиатрам и врачам бесплатно, под видом настоящих научных исследований. Почему они бесплатны? Потому что реклама препаратов приносит огромную прибыль издателям.
So if you go through a medical journal, you'll see page after page of advertising for bipolar disorder and treatment of using medications, or advertisings for depression and treatment of using medications, schizophrenia. So it's really everywhere.
I remember just a couple of years ago, the first time I opened the journal from the American Psychological Association called the APA Monitor, and there was a multi-page ad, high gloss, very expensive for Concerta, which is time-release Ritalin. I resigned from the American Psychological Association. I wasn't going to be part of this whatsoever.
It's very hard when your major source of income is advertising and advertising placement to write an article that's negative about a particular drug and expect that company to continue to buy ads in your medical journal. So that's a major issue.
Но законодатели мнений в психиатрии не удовлетворяются тем, что они заполнили медицинские журналы заказными статьями. Они также проповедуют учение о психотропных препаратах на курсах повышения квалификации для врачей.
Physicians and nurse practitioners and physicians assistants are mandated to take a certain amount of continuing education credits every year. Well, 70% of all continuing medical education is now funded by the pharmaceutical industry.
That seminar is going to be taught by a professional who is employed by the pharmaceutical company. The very nature of where someone is giving you your support means you are biased to that person's side.
Many physicians and many psychiatrists who attend medical conferences don't know that when they go to that conference meeting that's about antidepressants, antipsychotics, and it's generally an academic psychiatrist who's speaking, they don't realize that person's probably making about $10,000 for that 1-hour speech.
Но для того, чтобы быть в доле, не обязательно работать в университете. Психиатров, щедро прописывающих психотропные препараты, от души вознаграждают торговые представители фармкомпаний за развитие местного бизнеса.
Psychiatrists, especially high prescribers, are targeted and gifted extensively by the industry. Now that gifting is where you need to get specific.
That was not unusual during our marketing conversations to say, well, what's our top drug writer? You know, who's the doctor that's prescribing the most of this drug? Well, you know, let's send them to the Kentucky Derby.
We offered trips on some occasions to come out and hear a 2-hour talk, but it happened to be on a nice island in Hawaii.
There were a lot of things that we did day in and day out to try to get the doctors to write our drugs, or in my case, to write for the psychiatric drugs. We did a lot of lunches and dinners, and we brought in speakers, and those speakers were obviously paid by us, and we would wave, you know, renowned studies at them from renowned journals. But of course, we would never say that these studies were paid for by our company, and that it was written by a ghostwriter who was paid by our company, or that our company tends to do a ton of advertising within that particular medical journal. We would never say that.
Учитывая то, что ежегодно на психотропные препараты выписывается более 300 миллионов рецептов, наиболее активных психиатров щедро вознаграждают за развитие новых рынков. Они получают на 25% больше фармацевтических денег, чем любая другая область медицины. В среднем в одном штате это более 45 тысяч долларов в год для самого активного психиатра.
Psychiatrists get more kickback from the pharmaceutical companies than any other branch of medicine.
The profession of psychiatry couldn't keep its journals afloat, couldn't keep its conferences afloat, couldn't keep its organizations afloat without money from drug companies. The drug companies really have psychiatry in their pocket.
This is a profession whose diagnoses have been heavily influenced by people who are heavily influenced by the pharmaceutical industry, and whose treatments are almost exclusively these days pharmaceuticals. We should be able to count on them. I do not believe that we can.
Благодаря бесконечной рекламе, проводимой психиатрами, прописывание психотропных препаратов стало обычным не только для самой психиатрии, но и для всей медицины. Но у этой рекламной кампании есть второе направление, наполняющее карманы психиатров больше, чем что-либо еще. И его мишенью являетесь вы.
Abilify helps control symptoms of bipolar mania.
Ask your doctor about Effexor XR.
Paxil, the most prescribed medication of its kind.
Prozac Weekly is here. Zoloft, a prescription.
Serafen, PMDD.
And
Психиатры и фармкомпании не расхваливают свои препараты только перед коллегами, которые их назначают. Они также проталкивают их прямо конечному потребителю. Вам, рассчитывая, что вы придете и потребуете рецепт.
The direct-to-consumer advertising is instilling the notion in every human being that something is mentally wrong, something needs correction. That drives people to see a psychiatrist to help to mitigate this by dispensing the medication, by dispensing a drug that they have had pushed on them on countless television ads, countless magazine ads, and countless print ads that say, hey, there's something wrong with you, go get help for it.
Нигде эта вспышка прямой рекламы потребителям не является столь очевидной, как на телевидении. Так было не всегда. До недавнего времени реклама психиатрических препаратов на телевидении была сильно ограничена. Но в 1997 году администрацию по продуктам и лекарствам убедили ослабить ограничения на рекламу в СМИ. Прямое нарушение 10-й статьи Международного договора, подписанного ООН.
Every 5 minutes there's a new drug ad. And this is not by accident. This is cold, canny, scientific design.
Ads are fundamentally of two types. One type of ad is a effort to try to get the patient to take the drug company's drug.
Abilify helps control symptoms of bipolar mania and reduce.
But then the second kind of direct-to-consumer advertising is the "you're sick and you didn't know it" advertising.
You could be suffering from generalized anxiety disorder.
Because they want to create sales, so what they're going to do is tell people, do you have these symptoms? Do you have this disease? Do you have this particular condition?
But they hit it so hard on television that people say, ask your doctor, ask your doctor. Every commercial is a referral to the doctor. See, they're working for each other.
Ask your doctor about Cymbalta. Depression hurts. Cymbalta can help.
I can go to my doctor and say, here are my symptoms, and walk out with the prescription I want. I can ask for a drug by name, and most of the time I'll be given drugs. So basically I'm my own doctor.
The industry defends what it's doing by saying this is some kind of public health education campaign. And I'm sorry, I think if you go to an advertising agency, you're advertising.
С самого начала реклама психиатрических препаратов на телевидении была феноменально успешна. Всего лишь за первые 3 года продажи психиатрических препаратов взмыли на 250%. Имея рекордный валовой доход, фарминдустрия тратит $2 миллиарда 900 миллионов в год только на телевизионную рекламу. И как только это приводит людей в кабинеты психиатров, они могут купиться на другую маркетинговую уловку – бесплатные образцы.
The industry is willing to give out millions of dollars worth of free samples because it generates billions of dollars in sales.
You want a prescription and you want Prozac written forever as a maintenance therapy. So you establish that with some free Prozac up front.
Here, take this sample, it doesn't cost you anything, and then if you like it or if it seems to work, then we'll make a prescription, but you're going to have to pay for that prescription. The sample is free. So it's really a marketing technique.
They got a cash cow. Zero refill means you've got to go back to the doctor for another consultation, for another subscription, and it just goes forever. This is business. This is money.
Иногда прямая реклама потребителю маскируется под информирование публики. Психиатры регулярно появляются в средствах массовой информации с предупреждениями об эпидемиях психических расстройств и обсуждениями своих новейших открытий. Они пишут статьи для газет и журналов, которые продвигают их информационные кампании о психическом здоровье. Даже группы поддержки пациентов с их объективной информацией о психиатрических препаратах при рассмотрении оказываются группами прикрытия, которые финансируются фармацевтами и управляются психиатрами.
They were started specifically by the industry themselves. And the public isn't informed of that. You know, it's basically a great big lie to the public that they think they're going to a charitable organization that has their best interest at heart.
Например, дети и взрослые с дефицитом внимания, или ЧАД, крупнейшая и наиболее щедро оплачиваемая группа прикрытия для производителей стимуляторов. Стивен Плок, один из бывших руководителей ЧАД.
When I became the CHAD coordinator for Las Vegas, they gave me a manual, and in it said, we want to provide unbiased information to help and support people who have ADD. For the next 30 days, we put 22 parents and their kids on a program with lab tests to find out what their causes were, eliminated their causes, they got prescription-free, medication-free, side-effect-free, and they got better with their self-esteem, and they became actually happier, healthier, and more successful. Chad found out about this, called me up and says we do not allow people to talk about nutrition in any of our seminars. We only prescribe going to a psychiatrist who will only prescribe drugs and therapy. So they said you can no longer work with us, and they fired me for simply recommending that parents go get a lab test, find out what the causes are, and eliminate the causes. They do not allow that. They only allow medication and psychiatric treatment.
Психиатрические группы поддержки пациентов также продвигают лечение психиатрическими препаратами через общественные маркетинговые опросы, замаскированные под медицинские опросники.
You can take a survey of maybe 16 questions. And if you are a normal human being who's lived through ranges of emotions of normal life experience, if you've known the exhilaration of the birth of a child, a niece, a nephew, and the devastation of a divorce and the loss of dreams, and answer honestly to those questions, you will diagnose yourself as bipolar. And the instructions that come back along with the diagnosis or the warning that you're probably bipolar say, print this out and take it to your doctor.
И как просто человеку зайти на сайт, ответить на обычные жизненные вопросы и получить диагноз. Вот несколько добровольцев, выбранных наугад. Людей всех возрастов, ведущих нормальную жизнь.
Do you feel sad, blue, unhappy, or down in the dumps?
Sometimes. I've had periods of great optimism and other periods of equally great pessimism. Yeah, that happens a little bit.
I get tired for no reason. Sometimes.
My life is pretty full. Not really. For no apparent reason, I sometimes have been very angry or hostile.
It's hard for me to concentrate on reading.
I am restless and can't keep still.
My heart beats faster than usual.
I have trouble sleeping, shortness of breath.
Gained weight.
Trembling hands.
I have an idea that most of these are going to be sometimes.
Everyone has.
As in everybody?
Somewhat.
Somewhat true.
Just a little.
Well, yeah, I am. Alright, my score totaled 42. Bipolar disorder, moderate to severe symptoms. Wow.
The answer reflects on the presence of depressive symptoms.
Currently suffering from an anxiety disorder.
I may be suffering from bipolar 1.
Minimal to mild depression.
An obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Guess that means I'm a psycho.
Guess I'll go to a psych. Try to see if I could work it out, get some meds or something.
Одним словом, половина этих обычных людей получили психиатрические диагнозы и предписания к лечению. Так, половина населения США, около 150 миллионов американцев, могли бы быть классифицированы как психически больные.
Now you have a direct line of consumers just walking in with a little pre-survey that says that they potentially can have bipolar, ADHD, stress, anxiety, any of those categories, and they just need to take this assessment tool and say, okay, that basically that is what you have, and here's your drug.
И психиатры теперь громко требуют сделать такие процедуры оценки обязательными. Возьмите TeenScreen. Под видом программы предотвращения самоубийств в школах проводились тесты психики, чтобы поставить диагноз и прописать детям препараты. Детям, таким же, как и Челси Роудс, которая однажды утром ушла в школу обычным подростком, а вернулась с психиатрическим диагнозом.
The Rhodes family in Indiana, their young girl went to school one day, and all of a sudden they told her they were taking her into her room, and they move her into her room and give her the 10-minute TeenScreen test. And shortly after taking the test, she's pulled aside in the hallway and she's told she has two problems, basically, two mental problems. One, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and social anxiety disorder.
Her parents were stunned, dumbfounded. They didn't know that TeenScreen was going to screen their child. They had not been asked permission.
People at school had told her that she was mentally ill with these two conditions based off of a computer test that took her 10 minutes to answer. One of the questions was worded, if Chelsea went out a lot. She answered no. We'd ask her why she answered that way. She said, because Mom, you and Dad don't allow us to go out on school nights. I have to be home to do my homework and take care of our household chores. The other question was, do you ever feel nervous or anxious when you're in front of a group of your friends or peers? Chelsea answered yes. She explained to us that because when she has to stand up in front of a group of people and give a book report in one of her classes, she's very nervous. You know, I'm 43 years old and I'm nervous in front of every one of you today, but that doesn't make me mentally ill.
I absolutely believe that the survey for TeenScreen was intentionally structured to flag as many children as possible as having a possible mental health problem.
А кто создал TeenScreen и составил этот опросник? Доктор Дэвид Шаффер, психиатр с большими связями в фармацевтической индустрии. Опросник Шаффера является каким угодно, но только не научным. В исследовании, которое провел он сам, Шаффер признал, что 84% студентов были ошибочно помечены как склонные к самоубийству. Но что не было признано, это насколько травмирующими могут быть последствия. Алие Глисон было всего 11 лет, когда она прошла эту проверку в своей школе в Техасе.
It was 7th grade, and they had all the girls go into the cafeteria because they said that a lot of girls have depression, so they was working on some depression screen.
Next thing I know, there's those middle schools tell my husband and I that CPS is there at the school taking a layer because she's suicidal.
I'm like, suicide? I'm not trying to kill myself. I love myself. I've always loved myself.
So I don't know if she was even at the school or they already taken her away.
When they took her layer, my girls and I, we didn't sleep for about a good 3 days. For the first 3 days, because my house was empty without her.
And they was making me sign papers talking about if you don't take these medicines, you can't see your parents. So they was telling me, you know, if you take your medicine, you can see your parents.
My daughter was on 22 different types of medication that this one psychiatrist gave her.
They drugged me up so bad that they said they had to drag me. And I used to wonder how I got to my room.
When I saw for myself what they were giving her and how much and how often, I just thought, they're gonna kill this child. And the parents were helpless.
Then after a while, that's when I was just like, I'm not about to take no more medicine until I call my parents. And then that's when they was like, okay, well, we're gonna give it to you anyways. They restrained me and shot me up. I was in 4 points. They laid me out on my stomach with my feet like this and tied me up.
One day, they must have put her in about 12 restraints in one day.
They said I was restrained about 70 or 80 times. After a couple of months, they was like, you know, your parents don't want to see you. They don't want to talk to you or anything. So I was really hurt.
We tried everything. Nobody know. We didn't know what hospital. We didn't even know where they taking her.
After 2 weeks, you're supposed to hear, or you're supposed to be able to see your child. They didn't give me that. I didn't see a layer to 6 months later.
But I was a good child. I didn't deserve for that. And it messed up a lot of things. To this day, I still wish that I could just go back and be like, man, you know what, I'm not even gonna take the test.
I would always tell every parent I see, and they was asking me, don't do the team screening, because it will mess up your family.
Психиатрические скрининг-программы, такие как эти, быстро расширяются. Только Teen Screen в настоящее время проводится сотням тысяч школьников, более чем в 500 американских школах в 43 штатах.
Has nothing to do with helping kids, has nothing to do with mental health, has nothing to do with medicine. It has everything to do with the pushing of drugs.
So it presents itself as being a wonderful, altruistic program, whereas in fact, I believe its cold-blooded and cold-hearted intent is to recruit more children into the very subjective diagnoses of mental illness and to treat those kids with medication.
Но проталкивание психиатрических препаратов не заканчивается в школах. Был внедрен закон о проведении проверки на психическое здоровье всем гражданам, включая стариков, ветеранов войны и беременных женщин. Все это будет оплачиваться вами.
Psychiatrists benefit from both ends, from the pharmaceutical end for being paid to write the prescription, and then from the patient for being there to receive the prescription.
It's an industry that cannot allow the human condition to go unmedicated, and I think this is where the problem begins.
If everybody considers themselves to be sick in some way or more than one way, and that the only control, the only hope for their happiness is to be on pills for the rest of their lives, that's the goal.
The pharmaceuticals and the psychiatric community are in a cleanup, and that's what it's all about. It has nothing to do with helping our kids or, you know, their mental health. It's all about money.
Сегодня фармкомпании тратят свыше $5,3 миллиарда в год на маркетинг препаратов, отпускаемых по рецепту, почти в 9 раз больше, чем 10 лет назад. Итог? Продажи психотропных препаратов в мире взмыли до $80 миллиардов. А психиатры умышленно игнорируют огромную человеческую трагедию, которую сами же и создают.
I'm 10 years old, and I'm going to read, I think, the side effects of a drug called Daytriana.
The drug Adderall.
Luvox.
Cymbalta.
Gyudon. Lexapro.
Namenda.
I have a question.
Where do I find the side effects?
How do I read it if it's so small?
Just a bunch of letters squished together.
I can't read this. This is the side effects of the drug.
Side effects. Stroke.
What the heck?
Speech disorder.
Eye disorders, vision blurred.
Dry mouth. Nervous.
Tremor. Dizziness, delirium, and coma.
Tardive dyskinesia.
They experience worsening of their depression.
Aggressive reaction.
Paranoid reaction. Psychosis.
Serious cardiovascular events.
Other serious heart problems.
Heart failure.
What? Suicide. suicidal thoughts, suicidal thinking and behavior,
Increases the risk of suicide.
an increased risk of death, sudden death. These guys must be kidding. Wow. This is a guess.
Seeing this on a warning label, does anybody have any clue what they're putting their kids into?
This isn't good.
No drug has side effects. They're all effects. Side effect is just a way that doctors explain away the effects that they don't like or you won't like, but they're effects.
These are the effects of these drugs. They're not just what might happen to you, they're what happen more often than not.
We name them side effects because they're an unintended consequence.
The antidepressant drugs not only don't make you happy, they have all kinds of negative effects on the system as a whole.
These drugs are absorbed and distributed throughout your entire body, so they have side effects through all of your tissues and organs, including your liver and your kidneys and your nervous system.
They destroy the brain, the neural net. They literally kill brain cells and cause all kinds of brain disorders. That's why we have they're not side effects, they're direct effects.
Но хотя психиатры перед публикой постоянно преуменьшают множество серьезных опасностей для здоровья, они откровенно и без затруднений признают их перед нашими камерами.
I think I tell them the main side effects. I don't tell them every side effect because there's so many possible side effects.
I would say the majority of patients experience some side effects.
People get side effects to every medication you try.
They all have side effects.
All kinds of side effects. Lots of side effects. Physical feelings of sickness.
Headaches, insomnia.
They can't sleep. They can't eat.
Drowsiness. Sedation is very frequent.
Restlessness, appetite stimulation,
Neurologic side effects.
tremor or muscle spasms,
Stiffness. Weight gain. Obesity.
Weight gain and stuff like that.
decreased performance of sexual functioning. Sexual side effects can happen.
Sexual dysfunction, etc.
I've never had anybody die or anything, but I've had people faint and stuff, and it's really sort of unpredictable.
You name it, and it can be a side effect.
И почему психиатры не могут предсказать, какие у вас будут побочные реакции? Потому что никто из них не знает, как действуют их препараты.
At least with street drugs, people know that they're dangerous, that they should be off of them. With pharmaceuticals, people are told they're safe to take every day.
Но будучи далеко не безопасными, психотропные препараты все больше классифицируются как химические яды, способные убить.
Some of the side effects that have become of concern lately are suicide, increased risk of suicide, increased risk of homicide.
These aren't people that were horribly depressed when they were given a drug. These are people who are given a drug for social anxiety or difficulty sleeping or mild depression and then become suicidal. And so when they become suicidal and they kill themselves, what the doctor does is go back and say, oh, well, it's because they were depressed.
The label itself, the disorder, is what is blamed for the side effects. When in reality, it's the drug that is causing the side effect. It is the drug that is the problem.
Препараты, такие как антидепрессант, назначенный Вуди Видзаку, принимавшему его не из-за психического расстройства, а как снотворное.
My husband and I, Tim, his nickname Woody, we were married just 2 months shy of 10 years, so we've had a long life together. And Woody was a guy who was healthy. He was a big runner. He's never had a history of depression or any other so-called mental illness. He was given Zoloft for insomnia. I find Woody one night completely sweat through his shirt in fetal position, kept going, Kim, you gotta help me, I don't know what's happening to me. It's like my head's outside my body looking in. Kim, help me, help me. We did breathing, listened to music, prayed, anything to calm him down from this head outside his body feeling. And a week later, he was found dead hanging. A guy who loved life.
Психиатры утверждают, что их препараты спасают жизни. Но их же исследования показывают, что эти препараты удваивают риск самоубийства, а один увеличивает его почти в 7 раз.
As a pharmacist who has been studying the problem for the past 7 years, I do see a glaring connection between the high use of these psychoactive substances and the rise of violence.
If people knew that the mechanism was not known of these drugs, that they could
cause, if there's a real chance for them to get a homicidal tendency or even suicide, if you take the drug, there's a chance you may want to kill yourself.
And I could repeat probably a dozen other examples of significant self-inflicted harm or significant violence to others in patients who had never had that experience in their adult life.
Пациенты такие, как Дональд Шелл из Вайоминга.
Donald Shell was a man in his 60s, a gentleman, a family man, a funny man. He had had periodic episodes of depression, but never any real serious mental health issues, and became depressed, had a down period, went to a general practitioner and was given Paxil. 2 days later, he shot his wife, his daughter, his 9-month-old granddaughter, and then himself. The first question the jury was asked, very telling question, can Paxil cause some people to commit homicide and or suicide? To which they answered yes.
Дональд Шелл принимал Паксил лишь несколько дней до его смертоносной реакции на препарат. Но также доказано, что долговременный прием психотропных препаратов приносит вред на всю жизнь. Неприятный факт, который игнорируется психиатрами.
In the long run, the side effects may actually be worse than the original condition.
I don't think the average patient has any idea that the long-term use of this drug is now associated with very serious diseases, with diabetes, with kidney failure, with tardive dyskinesia, a movement disorder that's very serious and permanent and irreversible.
You can be affected by these drugs in any part of your body, your brain, your heart, your kidneys.
That's why people die early very often, because they are prescribed things and the long-term effects are, in some cases, the death of the individual.
И больше вреда приносит полифармацевтика, когда психиатры устраивают себе роскошную жизнь, назначая несколько препаратов, один для компенсации эффектов другого.
If you have drugs that create side effects, that gives you a ready market for more drugs to cure the side effects. It seems to me that it's a self-propagating system.
And what ends up happening is that each one of those new drugs that's added into the scenario brings on another symptom for which there's another drug, for which there's another symptom, for which there's another drug.
And it just snowballs into a vicious circle of one drug causing the need for another drug.
Sometimes people come and they're on such a cocktail of so many different drugs for so many different things.
It's rare now that I see a senior citizen that is on less than 5 or 6 drugs at one time. Some 12, 15.
One will lead to the next, and they're all toxic. This is how the game is played.
И поскольку психиатры распространяют свою прибыльную игру с назначением психотропных препаратов все дальше и дальше в общество, дети стали последними и самыми трагическими ее жертвами.
Rebecca Riley, 2.5 years old, they diagnosed her with bipolar disorder and ADHD. They had her on an antipsychotic, they had her on a heart drug, they say, for ADHD, and they had her on an anti-seizure. And then one other one for side effects. 4 drugs at 2.5 years old. She can't even zip up her own pants. She's like a little rag doll. The school nurse, 2 teachers, the principal, the social worker, all said they never seen any behavior in this little 4-year-old girl that would warrant these kind of medications. And all specifically called this doctor and said, please take her off these. She died at a little over 4 years old. This little girl that didn't have a chance. And the psychiatrist just let her.
Вместо того, чтобы предстать перед правосудием и сесть за решетку, психиатр Ребекки Райли, доктор Каюко Кифуджи, даже не лишилась лицензии. Можно было бы задаться вопросом, как психиатры выходят сухими из воды. Ответ находится в юридическом концепте, известном как стандарт лечения.
The standard of care is based on what do other doctors do? What would a reasonable physician do in this situation? And the reality is that what most physicians do is prescribe medications.
As long as they've done their paperwork properly and documented that this child had the symptoms that led them to this conclusion, they appear to be completely protected from any kind of a lawsuit as a result.
The standard of care is what allows doctors to seriously injure or even kill a patient with total impunity.
So the standard of care now has been implemented to where you can get away with, if you're a medical doctor, psychiatrist, you can get away with murder.
И количество смертей продолжает расти. Сегодня психотропные препараты убивают, согласно оценкам, 42 тысячи людей каждый год.
The cost to society is very real and very devastating. But the medicine they're practicing isn't real. It's a hoax.
Profit always comes before patient safety, and they take a very short-sighted view. It's all about how can we make money today, not what price are we going to pay tomorrow.
The trail of destruction that a psychiatrist leaves in his path is of no concern to that guy. It's all about money.
И это большие деньги. Сегодня оборот психиатрии превышает $300 миллиардов без единого излечения. И в то время как психиатры обещают все больше и больше чудесных открытий, количество их больных, искалеченных и мертвых жертв продолжает расти. Беззащитные – это общественность. Вы – те, кто должны позаботиться сами о себе.
My wife and I are blessed. We have 7 children, and we love them all. They're all our favorites. Each child we have is our favorites. And Beth was extremely special.
She was kind, generous.
She had like a really sweet and caring personality.
She had this beautiful smile, like an inviting.
She could make friends with basically any stranger on the street and get a smile or a laugh out of them.
Beth was having a hard time sleeping for maybe 4, 5, or 6 weeks. And so we said, Beth, you should go to the doctor and get something to help you sleep.
He said, okay, well, I'll try to give you something to lessen your anxiety, and it should help you sleep.
Within 5 minutes, a 5-minute visit, he prescribed her Paxil.
When I first saw Beth right after she went on the Paxil, she was different. Like, I felt like she was drugged.
And by the 2nd or 3rd day, she's like, I don't know, I just don't feel right. You know, I feel strange in my skin.
But after about 3 or 4 days, I remember that Beth was, at times, very different, like sullen, keeping to herself.
My mom and her were having dinner, and she said she didn't have any real emotion. Like, she kind of felt emotionally numb.
She was like a different person. Like, she just seemed like she was under the influence of something. She didn't seem like herself. She seemed like she was tripping out.
I talked to her on the phone, and she told me she didn't want to be there. And I was like, why don't you want to be there? She's like, I just don't feel like myself. I just feel like crazy. I just don't feel right.
I truly believe that she was hallucinating maybe and going in and out of this psychotic state at this point.
It seemed like she was melting down, like emotionally. She was becoming worse every day.
I said, are you suicidal? I actually asked her. And she laughed at me. And she said, no, I would never do that.
And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm just going to lay down next to her and I'll rub her head and I'll talk to her and we'll try to figure out what we're going to do because something's not right here. And my son Matthew was right behind me going upstairs. And when I got to the top of the stairs, I saw her hanging in the hallway.
Then the police were all over the place and people were coming and going. And about 3 hours, 4 hours after my daughter died, one of my friends came over and said, you know, I was speaking to so-and-so, one of our other friends, and she said, oh, Beth must have been on Paxil. That's the only way she would kill herself.
It just wasn't her. There was nothing in her that would have done that. She was the most non-violent, like gentle. It's a violent way to die.
It had to be the drug. There was no other answer.
If we knew what we knew now, Beth would be here with us today. I know that for a fact.
Трагическая история Бет Винтер лишь одна из многих. И она повторяется раз за разом там, где прописываются психотропные препараты. Но психиатры настаивают на том, чтобы вы верили, что эти препараты безопасны и эффективны, потому что они эксперты в области психического здоровья, а вы нет. Но снова и снова мы видим доказательства того, что верить им крайне опасно.
Psychiatry is pseudoscience. It's false science. It cannot withstand rigorous review if people would just look at the evidence.
If they help anyone, it's not worth the risk to the people that are harmed by them.
They are betraying every customer they have.
They don't know what they're doing, and we need to educate the public to use their feet and walk away.
Как же людям получить подробную информацию? Пользуясь ключевым правом в сфере медицины, плохо известным пациентам, но хорошо знакомым психиатрам.
We want to be able to present the patient with alternatives. And one of the central ideas in ethics is informed consent.
The components of informed consent are letting the person know, first of all, what the diagnosis is and what it's based on so that they can say, this is why we need to treat you. And secondly, what the treatment is.
Every patient in the healthcare system has a right to informed consent. That is, they have a right to be told the risks and benefits of the treatment, the risks and benefits of alternative treatments, and the risks and benefits of no treatment at all.
Patients should be totally informed, fully informed about every medication that the psychiatrist offers to them to take or says they should take.
Исследования подтверждают, что лишь очень малая часть полной и точной информации о психиатрических препаратах доходит до публики. Итак, что значит полное и точно информированное согласие на употребление таких препаратов? Врачи и эксперты, чье мнение здесь представлено, имеют большой опыт в данной области. Первое. Психиатрические диагнозы не являются настоящими заболеваниями, требующими медицинского лечения.
It's true that there's no biological findings that really support any of these psychiatric diagnoses being medical illnesses. And the burden of proof really is the other way around. It's not that you have to prove that there is no biological science. The burden is on psychiatry to prove that there is.
There's no blood test. There's no lab test. There's no X-ray. These are just clusters of behavior that a group of psychiatrists have voted that it's a disease.
Can you imagine doctors having to have powwows to decide if a heart attack is a real disease or not? No, they don't have to decide that. They don't have to have a vote on that.
They should be asking the doc, geez doc, where's the chemical test for that? Where is the objective test for this? And I guarantee you that they'll be told, we don't have a chemical test for that.
There is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. And any psychiatrist that you talk to, if you ask him this question, they'll all admit it in private, but they won't admit it in public. It's a scandal.
So this is all subjective. Nothing objective about psychiatry.
Второе. Нет научных доказательств того, что психотропные препараты решают душевные проблемы.
Since there is no measurement for these psychiatric diagnoses, because they're really just subjective, for the same reason there really can't be a measurement for the effects of the drug.
In terms of medication, the evidence that's claimed is the medications are highly effective and not very toxic. But actually, in fact, the data in psychiatry are very clear that that's not true. What is true is that the medications are barely, if at all, more effective than placebo.
You're selling drugs to people under false premises, under a disease that's been invented. So how do you measure efficacy among a disease that doesn't even exist?
Третье. Эти препараты маскируют симптомы и вызывают серьезные, краткосрочные и долгосрочные побочные эффекты.
Whatever problem you're being treated for, whether it's depression, real or otherwise, or cardiovascular disease, medicating away the symptoms is not solving the problem.
The patent medication gives the appearance of having helped because in the short term, it usually doesn't show the bad effects that are going to happen in the long term. So it's very deceptive.
The longer the patient's on the medication, the worse the prognosis is.
None of these medications hit precise targets. You begin accumulating all kinds of collateral damage. In other words, other organs in the body are actually harmed.
So for the first time, we're seeing kids in grade school or middle school who have type 2 diabetes and who have the beginning stages of cardiovascular disease.
So you see Parkinson's disease, you see tardive dyskinesias, you see other movement disorders.
Is it true that we're now seeing a lot of deaths from psychiatric drugs? Absolutely yes.
Четвертое. Психотропные препараты могут вызвать привыкание и зависимость.
One of the hallmarks of informed consent with psychiatric meds is you have to discuss the potential for addiction.
The vast majority of psychiatric drugs create psychological and physical dependency.
Most patients that I've seen that were on these drugs have difficulty getting off of them. It's rare for somebody to just be able to stop it without a problem.
Пятое. Большая часть душевных проблем вызваны скрытыми физическими заболеваниями.
Many physical conditions can cause mental problems or what pose as psychiatric symptoms, but the psychiatrist, in the records I've reviewed, psychiatrist does not do an in-depth study of what could be causing the problem.
And if the doctor isn't taking the time to find the cause of those symptoms, then unfortunately those symptoms may continue and there may be a serious underlying medical disorder that's being overlooked.
The question is it better to treat depression with a drug, or is it better to treat depression by trying to figure out what caused the depression and working it out with the patient?
Dehydration can make you exhibit symptoms of depression. Sleeplessness can make you exhibit symptoms of depression. Eating a terrible diet, hypoglycemia, being sedentary, all of these things are biological reasons for having symptoms of depression.
I have in my practice children who are misdiagnosed as having ADD, ADHD, who really have Lyme disease.
70% of all what are classified as mental illnesses actually have a physical cause, a physical problem causing that.
Шестое. Неважно, насколько силен эмоциональный и психологический стресс, существует множество эффективных решений без применения психотропных препаратов.
Once you've proven that there is no problem in the body and that there is no malfunction in the brain, then you have to begin to address these other levels of the self. And I think that's what psychiatry has completely stopped doing.
There are very few conditions that cannot be treated by other methods than the use of drugs.
Any forces that impinge on medicine that make us think that the drug approach is the only approach is undermining good patient care.
Из-за того, что о нелекарственных методах лечения редко рассказывают пациентам, почти никто не может дать по-настоящему информированное согласие.
When you get into informed consent, it's almost a responsibility of the patient to make an inquiry about the hazards of the drug and not rely on what the psychiatrist or physician tells them.
We can't go in and abdicate our responsibility as consumers simply because somebody has an MD after their name or someone is a psychiatrist and we think they know more than we do.
The best way to protect yourself is to educate yourself, is to ask questions not only of your doctor, but to do your own research.
Don't be ignorant, be informed. Get information from as many places as you can. That's how you'll be an intelligent, skeptical consumer, and that's how you will protect the safety of yourself, your children, and your entire family from this industry of death known as modern psychiatry.
Современная психиатрия проникла в наш мир в последние 50 лет, а с ней и психотропная эпидемия. Но есть способ разоблачить эти медицинские злоупотребления, направляя все жалобы о побочных эффектах психиатрических препаратов в агентство по контролю за лекарствами. MedWatch – это федеральная программа по контролю в Соединенных Штатах.
MedWatch is a voluntary reporting system, a passive reporting system where doctors, patients, healthcare providers, pharmacists, anybody really can make a report saying that they think that what they experienced or what their patient experienced was an adverse drug effect.
And this is what we call post-marketing surveillance, and this begins to get a look at what the side effects of long-term or chronic use of these drugs really is.
The FDA admits that probably only 1% of all the adverse drug effects are actually reported by patients or physicians.
Только когда сообщения обо всех побочных эффектах станут известными людям, вскроется реальный масштаб ужасов психотропной эпидемии. Теперь вы знаете факты. Покажите этот видеоматериал своему врачу и не позволяйте себе, своим друзьям и близким пополнить статистику большого психотропного бизнеса. За информацией о психиатрии и психотропных препаратах, а также чтобы сообщить о злоупотреблениях в психиатрии, обращайтесь в Гражданскую комиссию по правам человека.